Type NM cable, or what we often call ROMEX, has changed several times over the past century, and now there's a new change, and it's just beginning to show up in stores. We'll take a look at this new change in a minute, but first let's take a quick look at the history of NM cable so that we know how far it's come. Non-metallic sheath cable, or NM for short, was first listed and described in the National Electrical Code way back in 1925. But it was invented a few years earlier by Rome Wire Company in Rome, New York, and it was marketed under the trade name ROMEX. ROMEX is now a registered trademark of South Wire Company, and you'll see it pretty much everywhere electrical supplies are sold. Early NM cable had their individual conductor insulation wrapped in a cotton braid that was impregnated either with varnish or tar for moisture protection. Now, not much changed in the first 25 years until around 1950, when synthetic spun rayon was permitted to replace the cotton braid. But then, 10 years later in 1960, thermoplastic began replacing the braided jacket altogether. And did you know that at this point in time, most NM cable did not have a grounding conductor? But changes in the 1962 code that mandated all branch circuits have equipment grounding conductors had manufacturers adding reduced size ground wires to their cables. For example, it was common to have a 16 gauge ground wire in all of your 12 and 14 gauge cables. But then in 1965, a new requirement no longer permitted a reduced size ground wire in 10, 12, and 14 gauge NM cables. So a full-size ground wire has been required from that point on. And then by 1970, almost all NM cable had a PVC outer jacket like what we see today. 14 years later, in 1984, NMB cable was developed and required to have 90-degree C-rated individual conductors and a 75-degree C-rated outer jacket. The original NM cable was rated for 60 degrees C. In the early years, NM cable typically didn't have standardized color coding for its outer sheath. Most NM cable was white, unlike the colors that we see here today. This is a leftover piece of white 12-2 that I have from 1998 when I built my house. In the early 2000s, manufacturers and industry standards began adopting color-coded jackets for their NMB cables to easily identify the cable gauge and its intended use. The National Electrical Code does not mandate any specific colors, but the manufacturers have standardized the following colors for their NMB cables. White jacket for 14 gauge wire used on 15 amp circuits. Yellow jacket for 12 gauge wire used for 20 amp circuits. Orange jacket for 10 gauge wire used for 30 amp circuits. Black jacket typically for 6 and 8 gauge wire used for 40 and 50 amp circuits. A gray jacket is used for underground type UF cables, which is classified differently than NM cable in the code, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The idea is that the color-coded jackets would help electricians and inspectors quickly identify the wire gauge and the appropriate circuit rating. This modern color scheme has remained unchanged since the early 2000s. Well, that is up until now. Southwire's brand ROMEX has come out with some new colors for their NMB cable, and I was really surprised to see them on the shelves of Home Depot the other day. The standardized colors for their 2-wire cables have not changed, but now they've come out with 3 different colors for their 3-wire cables. Their 14-2 is still white, but now their 14-3 is light blue. Quite different than what we're used to, right? Same deal with their 12-2 being yellow, but now their 12-3 is purple. I'm not sure who came up with these colors. And their 10-2 is still orange, but now their 10-3 is pink. They didn't have any pink 10-3 at my local store, so I couldn't buy any to show you. I suppose this color change will be a great way to identify 3-wire cables and their wire gauge at a quick glance, but will it be standardized? Maybe it will, because I just discovered that CeroWire is adopting this same color scheme for their CeroMax NMB cable. They're now offering blue 14-3, purple 12-3, and I won't be surprised to see the pink 10-3 coming soon. These 3-wire cables are flat as well, unlike the round 3-wire cables of the past. This makes them very easy to strip, which I really like. I've added some shopping links to this new colored cable in case you want to pick some up for yourself. You should see a shopping bag somewhere here on the screen. Have you ever wondered what the support requirements are for NM cable? Well, if so, you're going to want to watch this video next, where I cover everything you need to know about the subject. I'm John from Backyard, Maine. See you soon, my friends.